Okay. Hey guys, so I want to make this video because obviously I noticed that there wasn't a lot of people on the Wednesday meeting, and I think that not only will this be important for you guys who might want to go to the Walsh event on September 30th, but also anyone who wants to join in the middle of the year to sort of figure out how to do Model UN and especially how to do crisis leagues. So I sort of made this slideshow. I'm gonna go through it in this video, just for those who weren't there at the meeting. So this is all about crisis leagues. And so let's talk about what is a crisis league. Now these are 2 to 3 hour afternoon conferences, and they're gonna have a preset crisis. So say for example, the sea is drying up and it's extremely important to this environment and the jobs in this area, that this sea does not dry up. So it's your goal to solve this, and you and your other delegates will work together to solve this issue. Over the few hours, more issues will arise. So say like in the middle of it, there's now a protest, like a major protest by these workers over this issue. So over time, it's going to get more difficult for you to solve this issue. So you have to be quick during these. The main players in a crisis league are the chair and the dais. The chair is the teacher. Usually, it might be Miss Stone or it might be the lake teacher, which is Mr. McCoy, and they'll acknowledge or disapprove of motions made by the delegates. And then you have the dais, which are usually about 4 students who will lead the crisis league forward by announcing the new events. So the chair will usually sit back and approve of motions. They're going to keep all the students in check. And the dais are the ones who have made the crisis and they are arranging all the situations that are happening. Just to show a crisis example as we go on, if you're familiar with the wildfires in Hawaii, let's just use this as an example of a crisis. So indigenous people are losing their homes, businesses are purchasing property from these people, and this was caused by strong winds destroying electrical poles. If you're looking at a crisis like this, you could pull up all these different bullet points on say, so these are the causes, these are the effects. Let's take one bullet point and then maybe for you want to focus on that in your directives. So we're going to talk about directives real quick. Directives, they're short documents addressing solutions to the crisis at hand. They are intended to be quick. The goal of a directive is for it to be quickly made and done. You will usually have 10 minutes at maximum to make a directive. And they are recommendations, not laws. This is something that confuses a lot of people. The UN does not have enough power to enforce a law. This is not like a global law that you are passing. You are passing a directive. This is a recommendation. And as we share the slideshow, this is going to be in the description. You can watch this video too, which will show you a better explanation of how to write directives. But I will go over how to write one here too. So we're going to pick apart a directive. Let's go through here. If you want to go along with me and look at what you're going to be doing for the September 30th Shmoon, you can go to the Shmoon website. It's Shmoon webpage, node webpage over here. Go up to the top where it says Shmoon Crisis League SEL and click on the SEL one. And then at the bottom, we're going to see directive template. So open that there. And if you're watching this from a later date, you can pull up this one or a different SEL and look at the template that they made. They're usually going to be different looking, but they're all going to be the same in the end. Now, if you open up that Shmoon site, you're going to see what this is what that would look like. If you're looking at this at a later date, it'll look a bit different because right now we're doing congressional simulation, but in the future it's going to look like what would I say? It would look more like a country, like national, international. Because over here you see main author and state sponsor states. It'll say main author and country. But we're gonna pick apart a directive. I didn't use this template to make a directive. I used an old directive that I found when us at JAGS we taught the freshmen about how to do a crisis league, and this is a crisis league about East Palestine. So we're gonna pick apart this directive and each part of it, and just sort of see what is what. So this is the introduction. This includes general information about the directive's origin and what it's referring to. So here you have the date, the main author and country or state, depending on what the situation is, if you're doing congressional or international. Signatories are any other country or like delegation that you like show them this directive. You're like, hey, can you sign off on this? And then they add a signatory. You need 5 signatories to put a directive on the floor to talk about it. Then we have the topic here. This topic portion is really not important. If I go back over here, yeah, they don't even include topic. They include the topic as the title. Um, this is really because the topic is more important for general assemblies when there isn't a main crisis at hand. So the next part we have is the title. This isn't required, but you need one just to like show what really you're talking about. It's a summary. Um, Sometimes you're going to want these to be creative because the chair might pick on directives that seem more creative. People might vote on directives that are a bit more silly. Um, so I remember Stone gave an example on Wednesday, and it was that they were talking about sending food to like Korea, and they did soul food because Seoul is the capital of Korea, and soul food is like a type of cuisine. So you would want to do something like that, something silly, but it's not required. So then we have 2 parts of a directive, like the main aspects of it. The first are the preambulatory clauses. These establish the issues which the directive intends to solve. For a crisis league, these are not required and usually not recommended because they take up more time than they should. Like you only have 10 minutes at max to make one of these, like I said before. So, but looking at these, alarmed by the recent event within East Palestine and acknowledging that vinyl chloride is a dangerous substance that is incapable of dissolving in water and is a cancerous substance. So it's just setting up the issues that you intend to solve with the operative clauses. Um, and in preambulatory clauses, you have preambulatory verbs, um, which would be alarmed by or acknowledging. Now, you can go to a simple Google search and search up preambulatory verbs, and that will come up. And this is the same with operative clauses. Now, operative clauses are numbered, and these ones are how you wish to solve the crisis at hand. Each one is a numbered clause, which is a different solution made. There can be sub clauses, so like there's like one here, and there's like A, B, C. Just if you want to include like all these aspects of like the same problem that you're trying to like target. Um, and there's also operative verbs. Now these are encouraging, deciding. This isn't really an operative verb. I think a freshman made this, but these 2 are the operative verbs that you want to look at. Now on your Shmoon thing, if you go all the way back over here, at the bottom of it, if you scroll down, you're going to see a list of operative verbs. So you won't need to look those up. In fact, if you're on this for this Walsh 30th event, most of the information you won't need to remember because they sort of explain it to you. Um, but the last thing you'll need to know is italicizing. So at the top here, the General Assembly and all the verbs. These are all the things you want to italicize. Everything else, while this isn't fully formatted correctly, you would want to not italicize the rest of these, just these parts. I say this is important, not as important as obviously making a good directive, but just showing that you know the grammar and the required like things to make a good directive is important because it gives you more credibility, and it also limits like people who don't like your directive from pulling like an unreasonable reason to like vote it away. For example, like if someone doesn't like your directive and they like can't find another reason, like a good reason to put it down, they can point out your grammar. It's like, oh, this guy did the wrong comma when it's supposed to be a semicolon here. Oh, you're not supposed to put a period there. Oh, this isn't italicized. They're gonna point out those minute grammar issues just so they can try to like make you seem less credible and that you don't know what you're talking about. Um, it's happened to me before. I've seen it happen to other people. So there's a chance it might happen to you. So just in case you want to remember how to do this italicizing, don't be that person though. Don't be the person who does that to other people. Now, What do you do with the directive? Obviously, you have to get those 5 signatories. This will usually be done in an unmoderated caucus, which we're going to talk about later. And then you want to encourage others to set an agenda through the motion. So in order to get a directive on the floor, you have to do I motion to set the agenda to this in the directive meeting. And we're going to go through that entire process in a minute, but just so you know, that is the motion to get your thing on the floor. Now, I did this in the class, but we're just going to ignore this part. I will show you a directive I made over the issue in Hawaii, the Hawaiian crisis. So I use the same format of the SHMUN document. So here we have the main authoring state, California, and 5 sponsoring states, Colorado, New York, Oregon, Washington, and Georgia. And this is relief for indigenous property. The SHMUN Crisis Committee, deeply concerned by the mismanagement of the United States Senate on the topic of fires in the Hawaiian island of Maui, that's a preambulatory clause, having considered the lack of funds which the indigenous people of Maui have to repair their damaged homes after the Maui wildfires, another preambulatory clause, and here are the operative clauses, authorizes a federal grant to the government of Hawaii for the purposes of providing indigenous Hawaiians apt funding to afford the cost of repairing homes. Now, the next part, I did a little bit of research beforehand. It took me a bit more than 10 minutes. So if you know information about the crisis at hand, you definitely want to use like as much deep information as you have because it makes you seem smarter. But here we have references a single-family housing rural disaster home repair grant system funded by the Department of Agriculture as a source of this funding. Urges that the monetary value of this grant will be determined by the amount of home damaged by the wildfire and the $50,000 maximum per home established by the Department of Agriculture. Further requests that the financial discouragement is made for companies attempting to purchase indigenous property through increased real estate transfer taxes on purchases made from September 20th to October 31st. Now, I will say, can the UN or even the Senate approve of any of this? UN, probably not. Requesting taxes, definitely not. Do people really care? Not much. They always ask for funding, and usually it'll come from international organizations, like reference like an international committee, especially for disaster repair. There are a lot of international organizations that fund money from those, but you usually will want to find some explanation for where your money's coming from when you're like doing a directive like this. But it doesn't really matter sometimes whether the UN can actually do it or not. At least for SHMUN. SHMUN, it's never gets into those specifics. But anyways, let's go on to motions. So motions. These are verbal requests made by the delegates to move the crisis forward. So when you're making a motion, you're going to raise your placard and say, I motion to blank for the purposes of blank. You don't always have to say what your purpose is of, but sometimes the chair will like ask for what purpose, and you might need to know that. Sometimes it'll just be like, oh, so we can talk about directives, so we can make directives, so we can revamp something. It's not like it doesn't have to be intricate. There are 2 types of motion votes. One of them requires a vote of half. This is a majority, or a supermajority, 2/3. It depends on the motion. Now, I'm also going to link in the description this document. I gave this out in class, not in class, but in the club. And if you need this, just talk to me. I have a lot of them printed out, and I can get one to you in paper. But it's a list of all the motions that you're going to need to know and what kind of like vote it needs. And usually, when it comes to these, it's usually just going to be a majority. But supermajorities, and sometimes they have chair approvals. But motion can be turned down by chairs too. So say you have 30 minutes left in the crisis, like 30 minutes you have to solve this, or it's over. You lost, basically. And you're requesting like something that's going to last 30 minutes, or like 15 actually, change that. The chair might be like, well, we only have 30 minutes left. So I'm going to shut that down and look for other motions on the floor. So you might want to consider that. So this is the Madian flow of debate. I changed a little bit of it to fit Shmoon, but when the debate opens, they're gonna call roll call. So this will be this. You usually don't have to motion for roll call or motion to open debate. It'll usually just be the chair that'll be like, okay, is everyone here? Okay, well, I'm gonna start roll call. Then you have priorities. Usually, you'd either want a motion for an unmoderated caucus, or if you have a directive prepared and you really think that they won't mind, you can set the agenda. But for the most part, the first motion on the floor will almost always be an unmoderated caucus, and we're gonna get into that in a minute. Another thing they can do is also motion for a speakers list. Now, we haven't used this a lot before Module, but Shmoon has wanted us to emphasize it this year, so I will go into what a speakers list is. So a speakers list is basically if there is no other motion on the floor, they'll default to the speakers list. This is usually done if nobody can agree on anything. So it'll give people a chance to stand up and talk to everybody else. That'll be like, listen, I have a directive that we can set the agenda to and talk about, or listen, this is my argument for why we should do this, why we should set this motion on the floor. The other one, set the agenda, which you use to put a directive on the floor, and if that's voted in, all you'll be talking about is the directive afterwards. Debating a topic, you have moderated and unmoderated caucuses, which we're going to talk about in a minute. In amendments, you can motion to amend a document. When a directive on the floor, you can motion to amend a document, which will really just be, I want to change it a little bit. Maybe it's fixing grammar or adding something that wasn't emphasized that you think needs to be emphasized. And when you amend a document, it needs approval by all 5 signatories. Even if you have more signatories, it has to be approved by all of them. Another amendment that you can do is also you can remove yourself as a signatory, and you decided you don't like the amendment or the document, and that doesn't need approval by anybody. And then solving the problem, there's either 2 ways to end an agenda. So if you set the agenda to a directive, you either want a motion to table it or end debate. Tabling the topic means that you're not postponing it, you're not voting for it or against it, but you're moving it to the side and you can bring it up later. Because you're like, oh, maybe a new issue just came up in the Crisis League, and you're like, we don't have, this doesn't sound relevant anymore, so you're going to change it. End debate is when you start the vote. So once you've motioned to end debate and then that's voted for, then you move on to the vote, which is a roll call vote. And you need a supermajority to pass, to both end debate and pass a directive. Now, all those in favor of, now this is a little bit important for you guys to know because it gets a bit annoying, and I think that it's important for you guys to know how this works. So in certain motions, the chair will first ask the question, all those in favor of passing this motion, and all those against. Only one person needs to raise their placard in favor of the motion for it to move on to the vote. This isn't the vote. This is just seeing is there anyone actually going to support this motion if we vote for it? If anyone says, "Oh, I'm against it," they raise their placard when they say all those against, what's going to happen is he's going to have 2 people stand up for and against and debate why this motion should be on the floor or not. And then after those people speak, then you vote on it. It's really complicated. No, not complicated, but it's annoying. But it is important for you guys to know how that works. Points of and rights of motions. These are motions that have to be approved by the chair and are usually done by interrupting the speaker at hand. Usually don't raise your placard to do them, but you can. They're not a form of debate either. So, point of clarification. This is just something that isn't understood when a directive is being read out, like a grammar mistake or poor wording. So, let's say, someone set the agenda to this. And now that the agenda has been set, the chair calls on somebody to read out the directive. So they pull up this directive and they start reading it out. And a grammar mistake is made. You'd be like, point of clarification. What do you mean by that? Because it might be poor wording, or you misspelled something and it's just confusing. Point of information is in the same situation, but something hasn't been put on it. It's something more direct. So say, let's go back to this document. So it's talking about authorizing federal grants to Hawaii. but it has no mention of funding. Like, oh, where's the money coming from? That would be when you'd be, oh, point of information. Where is this money coming from? And usually later you'd amend the document for it, but it's very important. The chair does not need to call on you for either of these motions, by the way. You just need to say it out loud, even if it interrupts them. Point of personal privilege. You don't interrupt anybody for this one. This is just is you need to leave and go to the bathroom, or just leave the assembly for a bit. Usually you don't even have to do this. It'll only be done if you're like in a big event and you're just like, okay, I need to go to the bathroom. You usually can't leave, but they'll let you leave. Like, they don't care. You don't usually have to do point of personal privilege. Right of reply. So let's say you're in a situation where they can't usually where only one person is talking, like nobody else should be talking. This is either on a speakers list or moderated caucus, which again we'll talk about in a minute. You'd be like you wouldn't be able to talk, but the other person is talking and talking and talking, and they bring up you and they kind of slander your country or your state or whatever, and you're like, well, that's not true, so how do I argue back? Right as they slander your country, you know, raise your placard and say right of reply. Don't wait for the chair to call on you, because they're not going to call on you. You have to say it out loud, right of reply, and then you get to take their time and stand up and be like, oh, this is why he's wrong. This is slander to my country. Um, and that is what right of reply is. Let's try some motions. So there's no directive on the floor, and you have a directive you want to debate. What would you do? And this would be setting the agenda. So you'd motion to set the agenda to whatever the directive name is for this situation. Oh, I want to set the agenda to relief for indigenous property. Okay. You don't like the directive at hand, but you want to vote it away, or you really like the directive and you want to approve it already. This would be ending debate. You are indifferent about the directive, but it's no longer relevant, and a different directive needs to be talked about more. This would be tabling the topic, because it's less of a process and it just lets you move on to the other topic. Caucuses. Now, this is the unmoderated and moderated. These are a set period of time which delegates have the opportunity to voice their opinions to other delegates. So there are two types of caucuses, moderated and unmoderated. Okay. Moderated caucuses are made during an agenda, mostly. You can make them when an agenda isn't set, but usually at that point you just want to do a speakers list. But speakers list and agendas basically work the same. So delegates may raise their hands and get the opportunity to stand up for a set amount of time to talk about the directive at hand. You can say whether you support it and why, or if you hate it and why. Nobody should be speaking during this time unless you use a right to reply. And it gives people the opportunity to talk to everyone at once. So if you need the chance to talk to every delegate at once, this would be the perfect time. And when you are motioning for one, there are two parameters. One, the time of the entire moderated caucus, say 15 minutes. And the time for each person's speech, for example, 1 minute. In these situations, you don't need to remember these two parameters, because if you forget them, the chair will just ask you to clarify. So it's not that big of a deal if you forget. Unmoderated caucuses. These can be made at any time. Usually this is the first motion ever made, like at the start of a crisis league, because it gives all delegates freedom to roam around and talk with other delegates. It's a great time for you to make directives, because you're free. No chair or dais is talking to you. You're working with other people to find like issues to solve. In a parameter, you're just going to say the time of the entire moderated caucus. So I motion for an unmoderated caucus for just 10 minutes for the purposes of discussing directives. So now we're going to talk about the final vote. So I just wanted to show this part because it might get confusing sometimes. So just to visualize the entire thing. The first thing that you do if you have a directive is you motion to set the agenda. And this is a 1/2 vote, like a majority vote. Then once you set the agenda, you debate a little bit, and then you motion to end the vote. And this is a supermajority. And then after you motion to end the debate, so the motion to end debate is not the motion uh, to vote on if the directive is good or bad. Because afterwards, then you move on to the final vote, which is a supermajority vote. And this is made by roll call rather than hand raise, which is usually how you do it before. But that's usually the only time you're going to do a roll call vote when you're passing a directive. I just thought this was important to show because while it seems pretty obvious, it can get confusing once you're there. Okay, let's do a bit of review. You can skip through this if you don't want to review it if you know your stuff. But can you talk during a moderated caucus? No, unless you are the speaker or you're asking for right of reply. What's the best time to write a directive? During an unmoderated caucus, because then you're free to roam and do whatever you'd like. How do you put your directive on the floor so that it can be debated and approved? This would be setting the agenda. How many signatories do you need for a directive to be voted on? 5. You've just motioned to end debate. What are you voting on? Obviously, end debate. Again, I just want to say this is confusing. There are 2 types of clauses on a directive. Which one is not required? This would be the preambulatory clauses. This would be these 2 clauses. You do not need to do these. But if you want to add more flair and you have extra time, you can add them. If somebody raises their hands for not being in favor of a motion, what happens next? So this would be the such situation where, they're opposed to the motion. So now we're going to take 2 people from opposing side and supporting side and debate why this motion should be passed. I'll say this once, the chair usually gets a bit annoyed when time starts to run out and people keep saying they're opposed to motions. And they're gonna end up saying, "Well, I'm just gonna skip all those against and all those in favor of, and just move on to the motion." So, if you do it enough, they're gonna stop caring. But that should be it. Just remember, September 30th, Walsh Conference. This slide shows all you need to know. If you need anything emphasized or like anything restated, I had pretty bad pickups right now, so I was struggling to say a few things. But if you need any clarification, let me know by September 30th, and I'll get that information out to you. I also am making a video for the introduction to Model UN, which is like the informal meeting. So if you are looking at this as somebody who hasn't been to those meetings initially, check that one out too.